people need to understand about this scenario? What have you all learned from it, and what do you think the community who is not sick has learned?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Oak Creek is one of your typical neighborhoods. The demographic is changing. A lot of people are moving out of town, are moving away, and there's this sense of call it white flight. The demographic is changing, and some people are uncomfortable with that change. So that's kind of what Oak Creek, and the outlying area sort of is going through right now, is this changing demographic and people being uncomfortable with it. I'm glad that we mentioned a little bit about self-segregation. We as a community realized that we were sort of self-segregated into our own community, and one of the things that we wanted to do was say, okay, let's get our community out into the broader community. Let's run for politics. Let's become teachers. Let's become police officers, law enforcement. Let's sign up for the military. Let's do our due diligence and being of service to this community. But I mean, as far as how difficult it was to get people out, it's still difficult. It's still a challenge. This is 3.5 years later. Sometimes to convince your own people, and I say this it's harder to convince your own people sometimes, because sometimes we have two battles we're fighting. We have an internal battle and we have an external battle, right? And most of the Sikhs in the room right now, we know there's internal battles. In every Gurdwara Sahib, there's an internal battle. There's a lot of politics, and this is at every mosque. This is at every synagogue, church. You have the politics of saying, okay, do we want to be part of that broader community? And we have to be authentic, right? And that's one thing that I bring up to law enforcement, where we were serving a community in Milwaukee that is going through some of the worst segregation, socioeconomic injustices that exist. Where I was policing was probably the worst neighborhood in Milwaukee that you can imagine. We called it Little Beirut as a joke. We got guns, drugs, you name it. I had probably 2 arrests a day, and I didn't move. I didn't have any movers, right? So I did no traffic. This is straight up guns, drugs. Most of the people that are coming in to police these neighborhoods are not from the neighborhood, right? I was lucky because I kind of grew up in the neighborhood. Both of my partners were African American, so we would kind of community police. I was lucky, and I say that with most of the officers don't know what they're getting into, and so there's automatically a disconnect. But if we start to be authentic with what we don't know, then we can grow. But if it's a masking of difficulties, then we're never going to get anywhere. So that's for law enforcement and for anybody that's in the criminal justice system, working in the criminal justice system. We need more programs to get police officers trained in the communities that they should be in. One of the things that I saw in my 9 months of academy training, we never went out to the community we were going to serve. Not even one time. Until the day after graduation, when they said, okay, young man, get out there and police this neighborhood. By the way, you got Squad 70, Little Beirut area, right? First time I went out there. So these are the challenges. We don't need to shy away from it. No, you guys are not. You guys are here and we're present, and I'm speaking to the choir right now, but that we also got to be advocates and get out there. So it's difficult.
I want to open it up soon because I know there's a lot to say and pull up these questions, but I want to ask these three if they could very briefly speak about this moment when there is so much, how can I say it, sort of anti-Muslim hysteria, and it spills over into so many other things. And, we are fractured in so many ways. And I wonder if there are, 2 or 3 sentences you can say from your work that you feel can help us get through this moment, and then we'll open it up and have a larger discussion about that. So who wants to tackle that first?
Having studied violent extremism and looking at my own past with a lot of scrutiny, and it led me to become a Buddhist. I'm taking a refuge vow. You can all call me Nejung Chosun if you like. It's my Tibetan name. Really a pillar of my personal faith is the belief that this human experience that we're all sharing right now is a basically good experience. And by basically good, meaning it's good underlying everything. No matter what else is happening, no matter what kind of atrocities may happen, the underlying experience is a basically good thing. And I think in times where we're facing mainstream cultivation of fear and ignorance and very, very concerning things every day, it's easy to lose sight of that basic goodness. And we can't do that. That basic goodness is our salvation. So whether you connect to it through the Dharma and meditation, or you connect in a mosque or a gurdwara or a synagogue or a church or a library or a coffee shop, this is something that we must not lose our connection with as we're facing these challenging times.
I mean, my encouragement is just to become learners, unfuel the fire that's creating some of these problems and issues and this rhetoric that exists, this hate. The only way that you can take away hate is you take away the arguments that create that hate. So when we're talking about, you know, a misconception that people have about Islam, and they say, okay, well, in you know, Muslims are, if somebody says Muslims are inherently, Islam is inherently a violent religion, educate yourself on the Quran. Start reading the Quran. Let's read it, and let's start to unfuel that fire. My man on the plane right here, was reading a Quran. I swear to God.
I'm just started, but I'm reading it cover to cover, and yeah.
And part of the reason was because we do get into a lot of discussions with people that are coming back from war and might have a little bit of PTSD, might be on edge a little bit, and they have these beliefs. So instead of vilifying them, we need to learn. We need to educate ourselves. Right now, one of the main reasons why we have these problems is because we're inherently an ignorant nation. Yeah, so I'm sorry. We need to educate. You know, if it's a school that educates on different religions, because religions play a big role in people's lives, let's do that. Let's impart that, and let's take action.
Yeah, I'd say my answer is probably similar to Arno's. I think I do believe in the basic goodness of everything and every being, and I'm reminded, I find that when I tend to be carried away with maybe emotion or strong, it might be somebody in the train who's nice to me. It's sort of, so I'm just reminded, I think, frequently of just the basic goodness of people, and I think that's, I also wanted to bring up this example. So there's this hatred. So there's a Sikh brother who goes to Trump's, rally and says, "Stop the hate." He's willing to stand up. So I think there's a lot of goodness around, and we just have to find it.
It seems like a really simple thing, but I think it's complex and big and powerful, and such a powerful idea. We were talking the other night and have had this conversation before about how dominant fear is, and the messaging about problems, and the messaging about the relentless problems. And this is across the board, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, no matter what you believe. Problems, 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 problems. Solutions, and actually doing something about those problems, is much more elusive. It doesn't seem to attract people, and yet that's what we're doing here tonight. We're having these discussions about solutions. And I wanted to begin with some questions about that, and to really dig in with you and have some discussions. And I think to get to solutions, and of course we're not going to solve all this right now, but we need to ask some very basic questions. And the first one I had up here, I think, is who is vulnerable to hate in our communities? Who is vulnerable to hate and why? What do you see? Let's name it. Let's get it out there and talk about some of those experiences. And again, I know it's very hard, but if you can make your answers brief, then we can get a little more collective intelligence from the room, if that's possible. Are you going to? Yes. No, the first question is, who's vulnerable to hate in our community? We have people mostly from this town and neighboring towns, but we have other communities. Can you speak about that? Is anybody willing? And I know it's hard to be the first one who will speak, but sir.
I'm a Muslim. Sorry. My question really is that we as part of the community, we need to, if we see some injustice happening, we need to speak out against that. And my example is my daughter, who's a graduate student at Harvard University. About a month and a half back, she was traveling on the subway train from Longwood Medical to Genzyme or to Harvard University, and at the just before the Copley station, when the announcement came that the next station is Copley, one man got up and said, "Hey, she's got a bomb," and nowadays they meaning Muslims, send women to, as what do you call them, suicide bombers or whatever. And so suddenly 5-6 people surrounded her. Luckily, she had the presence of mind to open her laptop bag and show them her Harvard University ID and her employer's ID. But I think what she feels and what I feel too is that nobody else on the train came to her assistance or said anything to her or helped her in any way. And I think we are getting sort of immune as a society to help where needed.
Thank you so much for sharing that really frightening story. And just think about if she had been a hotel maid or something and she didn't have her Harvard ID, right? I mean, think about that and think about, I wonder how often that happens. Does anyone else want to speak about their understanding and what they're picking up, what they're seeing that we need to know about? We hadn't heard that story, right? Many people hadn't heard that story. Does anyone else want to speak?
Patrice, I'm reminded of a story by that one, if I could share it quickly. Across from the Gurdwara that you saw in the movie, I think we're jump roping the table here. Across the street from the Gurdwara, the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin, is a bowling alley. And this bowling alley was like the headquarters of the police. This bowling alley is where Party found out that his father was killed. It was a lot happened there. In November of 2012, we had an event at the Gurdwara. We call it Heritage Day, and we got kind of all kinds of people from Milwaukee together of all backgrounds, and it was kind of like we're going to get together and share our cultures. And it was a really beautiful event. After the event, we all went to the bowling alley across the street, get some beers, and bowl a little bit. So I came in there with Pardeep and like a ton of other Punjabis. I mean, we came rolling in there like hard. And there was like the normal regulars there, and they're having a good time, and all of a sudden this huge sea of Punjabis comes rolling in, and there were some eyebrows raised and whatnot. And I still kind of like raising eyebrows, so I'm just like, yeah, we're walking in. What's up? And as we're walking in, one of the women in our party had a bag, a big bag with a bunch of stuff in it. And I hear this old white guy that we walk past go, "What, she got a bomb in there?" As we walk past. Now, I was a very, very violent person for the first 25 years of my life. I haven't put my hands on somebody